My name is Amanda Lewis. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how I gave up everything for a man, only to be treated like trash in my own home. But I didn't just walk away. I walked away with power, with peace, and with $800,000. It started with a reunion. Just a few old friends meeting up at a local bar near Denver. That's where I met Ethan. He was 35, charming without trying too hard, a middle manager at a construction firm who seemed different from the flashier men in the room. He wasn't loud, wasn't overly confident, but he listened. And when he looked at me, it felt like I mattered. He said all the right things. That he loved how grounded I was, how thoughtful I was. Within 3 months, he was telling me about a house filled with laughter, kids running down the hallway, Sunday brunches with family. I remember him brushing the hair from my eyes and saying, "Amanda, all I need is you. Just stay home. I'll take care of the world, if you take care of our world." I was working as an accountant at the time. Nothing fancy, but I was good at it. Independent. I could afford to help my aging parents, pay my car off, and still have money for little treats. But I was also tired of the hustle. So when Ethan asked me to leave it behind and build our life, I said yes. That was my first mistake. Just a month after the wedding, he asked me to quit. "You're working, cooking, and running errands," he said. "And Mom's condition, she needs a full-time caregiver. You'll burn out, babe." His voice was full of concern. Or so I thought. I resigned the next day. His mother, Carol, had suffered a stroke 2 years before. She couldn't move the left side of her body. She wasn't outright mean, at first, but her eyes were always heavy with judgment. I felt like I was being constantly graded, constantly falling short. I cooked for her, cleaned her room, administered meds, helped her bathe, and prayed she'd one day say thank you. She never did. At first, Ethan kept his promise. He gave me his paycheck, and I managed everything. I was meticulous. I recorded every purchase in a budget notebook, from groceries to Carol's medications. Even my own shampoo. But slowly, things changed. He stopped giving me his full paycheck. "I need cash for business lunches, you know, networking," he said casually. Then it became, "You don't trust me? It's for us." Until eventually, I was down to $1,200 a month to feed 3 people, manage medical supplies, and raise our daughter Sophie. I remember the first night I had to choose between diapers and dinner. I remember counting coins to buy milk while Carol cursed me for forgetting her supplements. I started texting Ethan carefully, afraid he'd snap. Sometimes he'd reply, "Busy." Other times, he wouldn't answer at all. Sophie was 3, and the sweetest child you could imagine. One night, her cough got worse. I texted Ethan, "She needs medicine. Please, Ethan. Help us." No reply. "Please. I'm begging you," I wrote. Still nothing, until, finally, a single word. "Busy." That word shattered something inside me. I wrapped Sophie in a blanket and ran out into the freezing Colorado night. I called Rachel, a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "I'm so sorry, but could I borrow a little? Sophie's sick. She needs antibiotics." Rachel didn't hesitate. I bought the medicine and took Sophie to a 24-hour clinic. The doctor said she had mild pneumonia. I held her little hand while she slept, whispering that Mommy would always protect her, even if it meant going to war with the people in her own home. When we got back, Carol barked from her room, "Where the hell have you been?" "I'm starving." "You left a cripple here to die?" Then she saw the porridge I made and threw the bowl across the room. "You're only good at whining," she spat. "You brought that brat into this house for what? To drain us dry?" I didn't answer. I knelt down and cleaned the mess while Sophie tugged at my shirt, still weak. Just then, Ethan walked in. "Mom, what did Amanda do this time?" he asked lazily, loosening his tie. I looked up. Did you know Sophie has pneumonia? I had to borrow money from Rachel because you wouldn't reply. Ethan, we're drowning. And you treat me like I'm a burden. I've given everything to this family. He rolled his eyes. All you do is complain. You wanted this life. Don't start playing the victim. That's when something in me snapped. I stood up, my voice calm but cutting. You're right. I am the problem because I've let this go on too long. But not anymore. Carol scoffed. You think you can just stop being a housewife? You planning to abandon us? I turned to her, my voice steady. Yes. That's exactly what I'm planning. Ethan raised his voice. Try not lifting a finger and see what happens. This whole house will collapse. I smiled. Then you better learn how to take care of your mother. Because Naomi, the servant, just quit. And I meant it. I put Sophie to bed, then sat in the dark kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the flickering ceiling light. That moment wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The start of something new. The next morning, I woke up early, dressed Sophie, and left the house with a diaper bag and $80 in my wallet. Carol shouted behind me, "Where are you going? Who's gonna wipe me today?" I didn't answer. I walked to the bus stop with Sophie, my arms trembling, but my heart lighter than it had felt in years. I didn't know where exactly we were going, but I knew we weren't going back to that house without a fight. And that's when everything started to change. The morning I walked into Ethan's office with Sophie at my side, I wasn't shaking with nerves, I was pulsing with purpose. His office was a sleek high-rise in downtown Denver, the kind of place with glass walls, potted plants, and too many men in overpriced suits pretending to be important. The receptionist gave me a once-over, probably clocking the dark circles under my eyes and the child gripping my hand. I straightened my back and smiled politely. I'm Amanda Moore. Ethan's wife. I need to see him. She hesitated but picked up the phone. A few awkward moments later, Ethan appeared from the elevator, sharp suit, manicured hair, and a face like thunder. What the hell are you doing here? He hissed, glancing nervously at Sophie. You can't just walk in here, this is my job. I stood my ground. You told me you take care of everything, right? That I just had one job, to manage the house. Well, I quit. So today, she's your job. He scoffed. Amanda, don't make a scene. I'm not, I said quietly, bending down to kiss Sophie on the cheek. Be good, sweetie. Daddy's got you today. Mommy has something important to take care of. Amanda, wait, he grabbed my arm. What am I supposed to do with her? I have meetings all day. I pulled my arm back and looked him dead in the eye. Figure it out. You're the one who said I was useless, right? Let's see how useful you are now. I turned and walked away. I could hear Sophie calling after me, her tiny voice trembling. It broke my heart. But I didn't stop. I couldn't, not this time. If I turned back, I'd be swallowed whole again. Instead, I walked straight to a senior care employment center in the suburbs. I remembered how I used to feel ashamed at the thought of being someone's caregiver, like it was a step down from my accounting career. But now, it felt like salvation. The woman at the front desk, Marjorie, scanned my application. 5 years of experience caring for a stroke patient, she asked. I nodded. My mother-in-law. She wasn't easy. Marjorie raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. Perfect. I have just the job for you. Elderly woman, difficult temperament, paralyzed below the waist. Pay is $6,500 a month. Live-in optional. Benefits included. I blinked. That was more than I had ever earned. More than Ethan ever gave me, combined. Marjorie slid the folder across the desk. They've been struggling to find someone who can handle her. Think you can? I smiled, really smiled for the first time in what felt like years. Oh, I know I can. That afternoon, contract in hand, I returned to Ethan's office to pick up Sophie. I found him in the lobby, hunched over, wild-eyed, with Sophie asleep in his lap and a coffee stain on his shirt. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 hours. She cried non-stop, he muttered. You can't just dump her like that. I took her gently from his arms. I didn't dump her. I made a decision, for both of us. He glared at me. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means I found a job. A good one. And from now on, you can take care of your own mother. I'm no longer your housekeeper. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't wait for him to find any. Back at home, Carol screamed the moment I walked through the door. Where were you? You left me to rot here all day. You think this is a joke? I calmly unpacked Sophie's jacket. I was finding a way out of this mess. Don't worry, you won't see me cleaning your bathroom again. She sneered. Who do you think you are? I looked at her, for the first time, not as a burden, but as a mirror of who I could become if I kept sacrificing myself for people who didn't care. I'm someone who finally woke up. That night, I made pasta for just me and Sophie. Carol yelled. Ethan sulked. Neither got a single bite. The kitchen was filled with the scent of garlic and liberation. And that's when the real chaos began. 3 days later, Carol had her first fall. She screamed for 20 minutes before Ethan got home. When he arrived, breathless and panicked, she screamed at him too. Where were you? I could have died. He looked like a man unraveling. He called every agency he could find and finally hired a woman named Maria, a kind, gentle girl in her 20s. She lasted 4 hours. Carol insulted her weight, her accent, and accused her of stealing vitamins. Maria fled in tears. The next day, Ethan brought in another caregiver. An older woman, very professional. Carol threw soup at her. Day 3, she was gone too. Every day, the house decayed a little more. Ethan was late to work, his shirts wrinkled, calls dropping during meetings because Carol was shrieking from her room. One day, I walked past the living room just in time to hear Ethan muttering to himself. This house is a damn war zone. I smiled to myself. You built it. Now live in it. Then came the day the neighbors started whispering. One even knocked on my door. I'm so sorry, she said. We heard shouting all night. Are you okay? I gave her a tired smile. We're fine now. Thank you. She nodded slowly. You know, we used to think you were lucky. Married. In a nice house. But now, she shook her head. Now we know the truth. By then, Ethan's face was gaunt. His jaw constantly clenched, eyes hollow. He had lost the arrogant strut in his step. Sometimes I caught him watching me and Sophie, like a man peeking in on a life he once took for granted. But I didn't hate him. I was just done. I had been a ghost in that house for years. Now I was real again. And with every hour I refused to fold, the more Ethan crumbled under the weight of the life he thought I'd carry forever. And I knew the storm wasn't over. The real reckoning was still coming. I should have seen it coming. The screaming, the unraveling, every thread was fraying right in front of me. But I kept thinking Ethan would eventually just give up. Maybe find a way to outsource his mess like he always did. I didn't expect what happened next. It started with shouting. That day, I had just returned from the park with Sophie. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows through the living room as I unlocked the door. Immediately, I heard the raised voices. Ethan was yelling, louder than usual. Mom, stop calling me every 5 minutes. I'm in the middle of meetings, I'm trying to hold on to my job. Carol screeched back from her bedroom. So this is my fault? You let that freeloader walk out and now you blame me for everything. Freeloader. After everything I'd done. I stood silently in the hallway, Sophie clinging to my hand. I warned you about her, Carol kept going. You should have never married that leech. She came in, took your money, ruined this house, and now you're falling apart. I heard Ethan's fist slam against the wall. You want the truth? It wasn't her. It was you. You've done nothing but poison this house from the day she stepped into it. And I was too stupid to see it. There was a long pause, then the unmistakable sound of something shattering. Glass. Furniture. I couldn't tell. Sophie gasped. Mommy. I crouched, gathered her into my arms, and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're going to our room, and we'll lock the door. Remember what we practiced." We stayed locked in, her soft breathing against my chest as I hummed to distract her from the chaos downstairs. But then I heard a sound that didn't belong. A sudden, terrifying crash from the balcony, and a scream from the street. I rushed out, barefoot, my heart pounding against my ribs. The balcony door was open. The curtains flapped violently in the wind. I didn't even have to look down. I knew. But I did. Ethan was lying on the sidewalk. Blood pooled beneath his head. A broken glass tumbler lay nearby. People were gathering, some dialing 911, some just standing frozen. Behind me, I heard the creak of Carol's wheelchair. Her face was pale as paper, her hands trembling. I didn't mean to. I threw it to scare him, I didn't think it would. I stared at her, stunned. She had killed her son. Minutes later, the police arrived. The medics tried, but I could already see in their faces, Ethan was gone. Just like that. A man who once made me beg for milk money was now a lifeless figure on the pavement. I told the officers everything. I was in the bedroom with my daughter. I heard shouting, then the crash. I came out and found him on the ground. Carol kept repeating, "I didn't mean it. It was just an accident. I just wanted to scare him." The officers took notes. Photographed the scene. But in the end, Carol was elderly, half paralyzed, with no criminal intent. She was released pending further investigation. That night, the house was silent in a way that made your bones feel hollow. I sat in Sophie's room while she slept, numb. My husband, the man I had followed into this life, who had reduced me to a ghost, was gone. And I didn't even know how to feel. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to. But because I couldn't. I had already mourned the man I married a long time ago. The next morning, the police returned. The decision had been made. Carol wouldn't face charges. Her health, the lack of intent, Ethan's volatile behavior, it all painted a complex picture. "You should prepare for funeral arrangements," the officer said gently. I just nodded. At the funeral, I stood by the casket in a simple black dress. Sophie held my hand tightly. Carol was wheeled in by a distant cousin, her eyes dry, face unreadable. No one cried. Not his colleagues. Not his few remaining friends. Not even his mother. It was a funeral without grief. When the lawyer called a week later to discuss Ethan's estate, I braced for a storm, but what I got was a strange calm. Without a will, everything would be split, 1/3 to me, 1/3 to Sophie, and 1/3 to Carol. The house. The bank accounts. His small investment portfolio. It totaled just over $1.2 million. I took what was rightfully mine, without a fight, without a word. I didn't need more. I just wanted to be free. Carol, to no one's surprise, refused to leave the house. "This is my home," she snapped. "I won't be pushed out like some stray dog." I didn't argue. I simply sold my share. Took the money and moved Sophie and me to a modest 2-bedroom on the edge of the city. It had a garden and a white fence. Nothing fancy. Just peace. I started work at a senior care center. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And it was mine. Meanwhile, I heard whispers from my old neighborhood. Carol's new caregivers, distant cousins and opportunistic relatives, started circling when they found out she had money. At first, they played the part, warm smiles, cooked meals. But the minute they realized she was just as bitter as ever, they began vanishing one by one. An old neighbor called me. "Naomi," she said, "you won't believe it." Her nephew actually said, "How long is she going to live?" "I'm not running a charity." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just felt nothing. And then came the final twist. Carol passed away in her sleep 6 months later. The family lawyer called again. "You won't believe this," he said. "She changed her will. Left everything, house, money, personal effects, to Sophie. Nothing to the cousins." I was stunned. Not because I thought it was generosity, but because I knew Carol's final act wasn't love. It was revenge. She knew they were using her. And she left everything to the one person she never showed warmth to, but who had never wronged her. When the news hit the relatives, they came banging on my door. "You can't just keep everything. That house belongs to family." Carol would have wanted. I cut them off. She made her choice. If you're angry, take it up with her ghost. And I shut the door. The house stood there like a monument to everything I had endured, 4 walls soaked in bitterness, silent meals, muffled screams, and betrayal layered on top of betrayal. Now it was mine. Or rather, Sophie's. But not for long. After I handled the paperwork, I sold it. I didn't want a dime more than I needed, but I was going to make sure my daughter had a future carved from peace, not pain. Between the inheritance from Ethan, the house, and the leftover assets Carol had left to Sophie, I walked away with just over $800,000. Enough to rebuild everything they tried to take from me. We moved to a quiet coastal town in Oregon, a place with sea breeze in the morning and silence that didn't scream. I bought a small home with white shutters, a yard full of bougainvillea, and a view of the ocean from the kitchen window. It was simple. Peaceful. Ours. I painted Sophie's room in her favorite shade of blue and hung up our handmade flower paintings from her preschool days. Every wall felt like freedom. She settled in fast, her laughter now filled with light, not fear. I got a job at a local senior care center. The pay wasn't glamorous, but I wasn't ashamed. For the first time in years, I earned every cent on my own terms. I didn't have to account for it in a notebook or beg a man for grocery money. And I was good at my job. Caring, patient, reliable, things they never saw in me, but that strangers now thanked me for daily. At night, I'd sit on the porch after Sophie had gone to sleep, the ocean humming in the distance, and think back. About that kitchen where I once cried over a $40 grocery bill. About Ethan and the way he used to smirk when I asked for medicine money. About Carol and her gaze that made me feel invisible. And I'd sip my tea, wrap a blanket tighter around my shoulders, and feel nothing but relief. Every now and then, a neighbor would ask about my past. "Where'd you come from, Amanda?" someone asked once during a community dinner. I smiled. Let's just say I used to live somewhere noisier. Sometimes I told them small bits. I was married. It ended. My daughter and I just needed a fresh start. That was enough. The rest didn't matter. Not anymore. One afternoon, Sophie came running to me, holding a drawing in her little hands. It was of me, with a cape and a huge smile. "You're my superhero, Mommy," she said proudly. And just like that, every bruise to my spirit, every night I held back tears, every insult I'd swallowed, it all became worth it. We had made it out. A few weeks after Carol's death, I received one last letter. It was from the lawyer. Enclosed was a short, handwritten note, scrawled in the stiff, uneven handwriting of a woman who used to only glare at me. Amanda. I never said it. But I saw it all. You were stronger than me. Stronger than my son. And you never stooped to our level. I left everything to Sophie. Not as a gift, but as proof. That the one we called useless was the one we relied on most. You deserved better. Carol. I stared at the letter for a long time. Not because it made me feel anything for her. But because it was the first time in years that someone acknowledged the truth. That I was never the servant. I was the pillar. I folded the letter, tucked it into Sophie's memory box, and went back to making dinner. Because life moves forward. I thought it was over. I truly believed that once I sold the house, moved away, and cut every last thread tying me to that life, I could finally rest. But greed has a long reach, and bitterness doesn't die easy. It started with a knock at my new door. I had just finished watering the garden while Sophie painted on the porch. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. It was Carol's niece and two of her cousins, dressed as if they were headed to court or a wedding, their expressions tight with fake smiles and veiled threats. "Hi, Amanda," the niece said, with a voice dripping in condescension. "We were in the area and thought we'd visit our family." "You're 3 states away from the area," I replied flatly. She forced a laugh. "Well, we figured it's time we had a talk. About Carol's will. About what's fair." Fair. That word ignited something deep in my chest. "You mean the will she changed before she died? The one that left everything to her granddaughter? The one your lawyer reviewed and stamped?" They exchanged glances. "She was manipulated," one of them said. "We all know you had influence over her. She was in a fragile state." "I hadn't spoken more than 2 civil sentences to her in 5 years, I replied coldly. "She hated me until the day Ethan died. If she left anything to Sophie, it wasn't love. It was revenge. Against you." They dropped the pretenses quickly after that. "You don't deserve any of it," her niece hissed. "You were a parasite. You walked away from responsibility. You let Ethan's mother rot in her chair." I leaned against the doorframe, my tone calm. "And yet none of you showed up until there was money involved. Funny, isn't it?" "Give us something," the other cousin snapped. "At least part of the house money. That was family property." I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly. Just enough to make the silence sting. "I earned every cent of that by surviving hell while you all were silent. I cooked, cleaned, lifted, carried, begged for grocery money while she criticized me for breathing too loudly. And when she died, she chose Sophie. That wasn't a mistake. That was her final message." Their expressions twisted: anger, bitterness, maybe even shame, but I had no energy left to absorb it. "I don't owe you a single dollar. You weren't there when she needed care. You weren't there when Ethan unraveled. You weren't there when I was holding my daughter through pneumonia because your cousin was too busy to reply to a text. So you'll get nothing. Not today. Not ever." Her niece tried to threaten me. "We'll take this to court." I stepped aside and held the door open. "Go ahead. I've got receipts, witness statements, and a legal team now. I'm not the woman who begged for Tylenol money anymore." They didn't step inside. They just stood there, realizing they were too late. As I closed the door, Sophie peeked around the corner. "Mommy, who were those people?" I knelt beside her. "Just ghosts, sweetheart. From a house we don't live in anymore." And that was that. I didn't hear from them again. Not because they'd forgiven or forgotten, but because they finally realized I wasn't someone they could intimidate anymore. I was no longer Amanda, the shadow in someone else's life. I was Amanda, the woman who had walked through fire, holding her daughter's hand, and stepped into her own future. The days that followed were quiet in the best way. For the first time in years, I lived a life I didn't have to recover from every night. Sophie laughed more. I slept deeper. The house was warm not from any heater, but from the peace we finally had. One evening, while I was finishing dinner, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, unknown number. But something told me to pick up. Hello, is this Amanda Lewis? Yes. Speaking. This is Gregory Hale. I'm a senior partner at Shoreline Consulting, an accounting firm based in Portland. We've heard about your work from someone at the Senior Care Center. You're the woman who handled all the patient records, right? I blinked, unsure how to respond. Yes, I handle admin for our wing. Well, your name came up during our process of expanding into elder care finance management. We're looking for someone with compassion, grit, and real-world experience. We've reviewed your background. You used to be a CPA? I hadn't heard that acronym in years. My throat tightened. I said. Before I got married. There was a pause. We'd like to meet with you. I think you'd be a great fit to lead our new compliance and patient finance division. It's a flexible position, mostly remote with benefits. Starting salary at $90,000. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, spoon in hand, heart racing. He kept talking, details, paperwork, potential training. I barely heard any of it. All I could think about was the version of myself I buried years ago, the sharp, focused woman who once prided herself on her independence. She wasn't dead. She'd just been sleeping. I'd love to meet, I finally said. We scheduled a video interview for the following week. When I ended the call, I just stared at the wall for a long time. Then I laughed. It wasn't loud or giddy, it was soft, almost disbelieving. A kind of sound that bubbles up when you realize that life, even after everything, hasn't given up on you. That night, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. Not the same Amanda who begged Ethan for a grocery budget. Not the one who walked barefoot through a freezing night for antibiotics. And definitely not the one who stayed silent when insulted in her own kitchen. I was a woman rebuilding. The interview went better than I could have dreamed. I showed them old portfolio files, spoke clearly, confidently. I didn't try to hide the gap in my employment. I explained it. I even told them about caring for a stroke victim. The woman across the screen nodded, impressed. You've done more than some people do in an entire decade, she said. They offered me the job 2 days later. I called Rachel, yes, the same Rachel who lent me money for Sophie's pneumonia years ago, and told her everything. You know, she said through the phone, I remember when you used to downplay how smart you were. Like it made people uncomfortable. Not anymore, huh? Not anymore, I smiled. We started fresh. New job. New routine. Sophie thrived in school, her teachers praising her for her empathy and curiosity. I watched her bloom under stability, something I once thought was a luxury. The irony? I didn't feel rich, even with all that money. But I felt powerful. Not because of what was in the bank, but because I had finally remembered who I was before they stripped it away. It had been nearly a year since I left Denver behind, since I handed Ethan his mother's diaper and walked out of that cursed house with nothing but my child and my pride. I had no intention of going back. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a letter. A real one. Not an email. Not a call. Just an envelope with my name, no return address, written in a trembling hand I didn't recognize. Inside was an invitation. A memorial service. Not for Ethan. Not for Carol. But for Carol's legacy, organized by a local community group that claimed she had been a woman of quiet strength, raising a son, surviving hardship. A ridiculous fiction. It was being held at the community hall near our old neighborhood. There'd be a slideshow, a speaker, and refreshments paid for by Carol's remaining family, the same ones who had begged me for money months earlier. I laughed when I first read it. But as I folded the letter back into the envelope, something inside me stirred. Not anger. Not vengeance. Closure. I booked a round-trip ticket, left Sophie with Rachel, and wore the same charcoal gray dress I wore to Ethan's funeral. Simple. Unassuming. But powerful in its quiet dignity. When I walked into that hall, the whispers began almost instantly. Is that Amanda? She actually came? Didn't she get all of Carol's money? I didn't flinch. I walked past the rows of chairs, past the photo table decorated with artificial lilies and a framed picture of Carol, one from decades ago, before the bitterness carved itself into her face. The MC began speaking about sacrifice and maternal devotion. How Carol had given so much and asked for so little. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, listening to the air grow thick with false memories. And then, he opened the floor for anyone who wanted to share. Silence. Until I stood up. My heels echoed as I stepped onto the small stage. Some mouths dropped open. Some eyes narrowed. And a few people, those who had seen my story unfold behind closed doors, leaned forward. I took the mic. My name is Amanda. I was Carol's daughter-in-law. I was married to her son, Ethan. A pause. A few nods. Many of you remember Carol as a strong woman. I won't dispute that. She was strong. But not always in the ways you think. She was strong in her opinions. Strong in her judgment. And strong in her silence. A murmur swept the room. I cared for Carol full-time for 5 years. I fed her, cleaned her, carried her. I gave up my career, my independence, my peace, to become a version of myself that she never once acknowledged. I did it because I believed family meant something. More shifting in the seats. But strength isn't about suffering in silence. It's about standing up when no one else will. It's about protecting your child even when the house around you is burning. That was the kind of strength I learned, not from Carol, but from surviving her. I could feel the tension now. I softened my voice. I don't hate Carol. I don't wish her pain. I believe she did the best she knew how to do. But let's not rewrite history with platitudes. She was a woman who left behind brokenness. And, in her final act, chose to hand power to the one person she tried hardest to ignore, me. I looked at the crowd, steady. She left everything to my daughter. Not out of love, but to punish the people who stood by and watched her cruelty, until they thought there might be something to gain. I placed the mic gently on the podium and walked off the stage. No applause. No boos. Just silence. The kind that comes when truth slices through comfort. As I reached the exit, one of Carol's cousins caught up to me. You didn't have to come and humiliate us. I stopped and looked her in the eye. I didn't come to humiliate anyone. I came to tell the truth, for once, in a room that only ever heard lies. And then I walked out. That was the last time I ever returned to Denver. Back in Oregon, I picked Sophie up from school. She ran into my arms, her curls bouncing in the sun. I drew something for you, she said, handing me a drawing. It was our house. Just the two of us, standing under a tree with a sign that said home. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked at me with wide, curious eyes. Mommy, are you happy now? The question was so simple it cracked my heart open. I kissed her forehead. I am, baby. Because I finally remembered who I am. She nodded and closed her eyes, her breathing soft and steady. I stepped outside to the porch and watched the stars blink over the ocean. And I realized something. All those years I thought I was stuck, small, powerless. I was never any of those things. I was just a woman waiting for the storm to pass so I could build something better from the ruins. And I had. I wasn't the servant anymore. I was the architect of a life I loved.